You go, Siddharth. This is your meeting. You can
Okay,
introduce us all.
fine. So hello, and I'm Siddharth from Medblocks, and we have Ian here from FreshEHR. So this is a collaborative session that we are doing to just develop templates and archetypes together and see it coming out in the application, and how we'll go through the whole process. And I'll let Ian introduce himself.
Yeah, so I'm Ian McNicoll. I was a family doctor in Scotland, in the UK, but I've been working in health informatics for, well, years, decades, 40 years, and with openEHR for about 15 years. But my day job is basically what we're about to do now, which is to advise companies, countries, organizations on how to put together the building blocks of openEHR, the archetypes and the templates. And I guess you probably have all played a little bit with the tooling. So the trick is not the tooling. The tooling is easy to use. Knowing how to put the blocks together is quite difficult, and it's not hard intellectually, it just requires quite a lot of experience because there are so many different use cases. So I find that the challenge here is not building openEHR, it's how you use openEHR to build applications, in particular build the data sets in the most effective way.
Right. So that's great. And so right now, I am a doctor myself. You are a doctor, and we also have Dr. Pramod here, who's a doctor by training. And I'll let him introduce himself before we start the session.
I'm Dr. Pramod Jacob. Besides my doctor's training, I've also done a master's in medical informatics from Oregon Health Sciences University.
We also have Mr. Dileep from EHR.Network.
I'm basically from a technology background, and towards 2014-15, I kind of came across openEHR. That kind of changed my way of looking at the problem and solution itself. So, and then I moved on to start initiate a startup called Healthy Life, where we were trying to actually build, understand more about openEHR and build a platform, a set of healthcare APIs that app developers can use quickly to build out applications.
Yeah, right. So hit me with it.
Yep. So we are first going to be looking at the allergy template. And once you take a look at the full template, we'll be taking a look at how the UI finally looks like. So yes, let's start with the template. What do you think about that? Just click on that allergy reaction list. So we are using a section here under the content. We are just using an encounter as the first composition, and the adverse reaction risk is what we are using here. And this is supposed to be an allergy list. So a list of allergies that somebody picks individually as in a template.
What have you got right at the top? Which composition? Yeah, you got encounter. Okay, that's fine.
Encounter. And then that section, I'll just click on the adverse reaction list. Yep, so that is a section, which is the adverse reaction list section. And yeah, we are filling in the slot.
Yep. Okay, just come down a little further. It's fine. Okay, that looks absolutely fine to me. So that, as you probably know, that archetype is very, very similar, almost identical to the fire allergy intolerance resource, and that's because we dual modeled it. So I worked, Heather, Leslie, myself, and some of the fire guys worked together on that. So that's why it's very, very closely aligned. And this is what you've got there in terms of design. So the only thing I'm trying to find a copy of one of my allergies records. Of course, you can never find these things when you're looking for them right away. But let me see if I can find ours. Appear to CKM. That's IDCR allergies. yeah, just a couple of things I would say. There is an explicit adverse reaction list composition that you could use. Now, you know, there's nothing bad having an encounter at the top. You know, we try to have very few compositions. It just labels it very clearly as an adverse reaction list, or probably more likely the adverse reaction list, because I think you would want to have one of these for the patient. So at the very top level, I would be using the adverse reaction list as my
so instead of the encounter, okay,
instead of the encounter, yeah.
Right. Do you have an example with a?
I do. I'll show you ours.
Yeah, you share the screen.
I'll share screen.
I think it's very similar, isn't it? It's like there's not much different.
No. This is fine tuning. So when I offer advice like this, or say, look, this is what we do, some of these are sometimes quite fine decisions. You know, some of this is a lot of this is art. You know, we're all still learning the best patterns to use. But I think there are certain, if you like, artifacts. Have I got the right screen sharing? I'm not sure I do.
Yep.
Oh, I have. Oh, sorry.
Right.
Yeah. Can you see that?
Yep.
I'll walk you through ours and why it's different. So we use the adverse reaction list archetype at the top, so the composition.
Okay.
Then we also had an allergy section. Now, I think if I was redoing that, I'd probably do it differently now, because it's kind of redundant. You don't need it. There is no necessity to put sections in, and all it does is stretch the path. They're longer paths for you to traverse. I'm sure the performance hit is tiny, the storage hit is tiny, but it's there. So if I was redoing this, I would probably take that out. To be honest, I think we put that in almost as a political thing, because there's a body in the UK called the Professional Record Standards Body, and they didn't really understand anything other than headings. So we were said, oh yeah, we're aligned with your allergies and adverse reactions heading. So that's why it's there, rather than any real technical reason. Then we're using the same archetype as you know, multiple occurrence. There are quite a lot of data points we have left unconstrained. I actually prefer yours. So when I've been talking to customers recently, one of the things about allergies is that we know that clinicians are really bad at recording these things accurately. There was some very good work done by Microsoft and the NHS about 15 years ago, where they actually did some real testing with real clinicians filling out data. And things like criticality, which is, you know, how bad do you think this is? Is it life-threatening? Or, you know, it's like, don't do this again. No, really don't give them this, you know. Even categories, things like reaction, even severity. I see you've got severity. Actually, clinicians are really bad at recording this. It doesn't mean that what's the inter-rater reliability. You know, one person's mild is another person's moderate, is another person's severe. Right. So although clinicians like to say all these things, and that's why we've got all of these potential data points, my view increasingly is have the minimum. And the minimum probably is the causative agent, which is what were they allergic to, because that's what triggers the decision support. So if you start to get into smart decision support and you know, drug interactions and whatever, that's the thing that really matters. Right. Status probably is useful, particularly as we got on to testing. You know, as the world will get a bit more used to saying we actually do testing for penicillin allergy. The fact that it has been positively confirmed is probably going to be helpful. So I'd leave that in. I would take criticality out.
Why are you using a text here rather than the default coded text?
I'm trying to remember why, and I'm not sure this is a good example. Let me remind myself what's in under coded text. So this is what we had originally. I would actually say just go with what Fire has, and I can't remember what's in there now. It maps to It's the clinical status of this thing. Has it been, is it definite, confirmed? I can't remember. This might be a slightly older version of the.
This is the allergy intolerance fire resource, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Clinical status, active, inactive, resolved. Category.
Yeah, no, it's not that one. It's I think they're daft. I don't really know what an inactive allergy means. It's the other. I think it's verification status.
Verification status. Okay, we do have something like that. Okay, that is unconfirmed, confirmed, refuted, entered in error.
Yeah. So for me, that would be confirmed and unconfirmed. That's what I would use. And given that fire has a lot of it's got a lot of take up, and you've got to map in. So if I was using the coded text, I'm not sure why we changed the status there, in all honesty. I would be taking out likely, suspected, and it's confirmed and suspected. They're the two that I would leave in. So I don't know what's happened here, which is confirmed and unconfirmed. I wouldn't have resolved, and I wouldn't have refuted, because for me, because we are storing this data, and this is the patient's record. It's not a copy that's being moved between different systems. If for me, this is a list of the allergies that we should be worried about. If an allergy has been refuted, or genuinely you think it's gone away and resolved, then you take it out of the allergy list. Right. So we would just delete that from the allergy list. Now, it would obviously, in openEHR, as you know, everything is version controlled and audited. So we've got that. And I would put, if I was to delete this allergy because I genuinely thought it was a mistake, or the patient, we gave them penicillin and they didn't die. Okay, we know they're not allergic to penicillin. I would put that in the metadata of the deletion as the reason it's been deleted, because tested, etc., etc. Right. So we had this discussion with the international community. That makes sense? So
yeah. So basically, you have only one copy of the whole allergy list on the EHR for a single patient. Yes,
you want to aim for that. Now, it's not always possible to do that. So it depends on your use case. So there's a thing in the UK called the shared care record, where it sounds as if it's just a single record, but it isn't. It's just an aggregation of multiple different feeds from different hospitals and different doctors. So a patient may well have 3 allergies records: a hospital allergy record, a GP allergy record, a mental health allergy record. So that's a situation where you may have to end up with 3 different allergy lists, because there is no way of amalgamating them. But if I was building a patient-centric EHR, which is what openEHR is about, I would be saying we need to have a single source of allergy list. And then if you're feeding data from elsewhere, then there is a manual reconciliation process to tidy that up, because this is what triggers decision support.
Got it.
So to follow that through, onset of last reaction, I saw you have, there's a thing in here where we've got this idea of reaction event and multiple reaction events. We don't use that. In fact, we think there is only one system in the entire world that allows you to capture a single allergy propensity. So the idea at the top thing is there is a risk that this person is allergic to penicillin. And then down here, we have the ability to capture one or more actual reactions. So I gave them penicillin last year and they had a rash. Oops, I gave them it again and they had anaphylaxis. Hopefully there's not a third one. And that seems logical, but actually we know, like all of the systems in the UK that we know about, if somebody had 2 reactions, they would end up with 2 penicillin allergy records. Right, so you may find that this multiple occurrence is not really needed.
Okay,
and I probably wouldn't have
entry in the same reaction, the thing.
Yeah, exactly. But you can do it now. And the only other thing that I would say is really, really helpful, I think, is the manifestation. So don't tell me how bad it is you think it was, or how bad an idea is. Tell me what actually happened last time. Okay. If they had a little fine rash and I think I need to give them penicillin because I think they have meningitis, that's way more helpful you know, or if they said, look, they had an anaphylaxis or a Stevens-Johnson syndrome or something really nasty, you're going to think twice about it.
Right.
But this is more a clinical conversation than than an informatics one. But this is our job, is to try to, because most clinicians do not, they're just used to recording what they record or what their boss told them to record, and there's very little academic rigor about thinking what we should record and what we shouldn't record and the value of it.
Right. Okay. So now, you also have an empty list info.
Yeah. So I don't know if this is something that you've come across. So the challenge here is, well, we need to say there are no allergies, right? Have you had any allergies? So you could say, well, if there are no allergies, then just don't record them. The screen is blank, or it says there are no allergies recorded, you know, because it can't find anything. The actual list is empty. But sometimes people want to say explicitly, I've asked a question and there are no allergies. So this is almost like a meta documentation that somebody is saying, I did ask the question. The list is empty, but I've checked that it's empty. And again, this is one of these design decisions that some places want, some places don't. And this is, in openEHR, we use this idea of global exclusions to say there are no allergies, or there are no significant problems, or there are no procedures.
Right. So that exclusion is an archetype, right?
That's an archetype. So you would never have these, and we can't really assert this in openEHR, but if you've got one of these and you've got one of these, you've done something wrong. This should only be allowed to be entered if there are no actual adverse reaction risk archetypes. It is a statement. It's a positive statement that this list is empty. There's a further subtle variation of that.
Ian, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, sure, go on.
What was the list? When you named an allergy, which list did it pick it up from? Do you use SNOMED there?
Yeah. So where would SNOMED come in? Where we would use SNOMED in the UK, and it would be
positive
here.
agent.
Positive agent, or we also use our drug dictionary called DM&D, but it is based on SNOMED. So essentially SNOMED, I would use SNOMED there, and I would use SNOMED there under manifestation, if it could be coded.
Okay. Right. Yeah. So here you actually made it as a text field, right?
Yeah, but remember in openEHR, a text, the text data type can always be subclassed into a coded text. All right. So I could say I could say in the template, it's modeled as a text in the archetype, because we can't be sure that everybody who wants to use this is able to use a coded terminology. But in UK terms, I would now be saying, no, we will definitely use SNOMED here. So we're subclassing it, right? And
is that now possible using EHR base right now?
Yes,
so let's say
it's part of the. If you look at the openEHR reference model, you'll see that DV coded text is a subclass.
Right.
So anytime there's a DV text constraint, you can always turn that into a DV coded text at runtime or in the template.
I see. Got it. Makes sense.
And the same for their manifestation. We could say, no, we want a list of SNOMED terms here.
Right. So again, by runtime, we mean that after we post the template.
So you could either apply that constraint at template level, as I've done here. So I've basically subclassed it. I've said, no, you can't have text here. You must have a code. Okay. And I could then hook up the appropriate subset file value set, or I could just leave that open, and then it's implementation guidance to the vendor, to the developer, to say, no, I want you to make use of this file value set. So I know I've got the gas boiler engineer is coming. So I'll be back in 2 minutes.
All right. So until then, we'll again switch gears, and we'll see how we'll make a user interface for this, right? So we've already made a UI for this. I think Nishta, if you can share your screen, we'll just take a look at that. And until Ian comes, we can discuss it amongst ourselves as well. So we can see what.
You can't share the screen.
You are not allowed to share the screen. Oh,
Okay.
this shared the screen. All right.
Oh,
Okay. Yeah. So, Dileep sir, what do you think about the allergy? Same thing. Whatever we've made the template of. This is the UI part of it. So, what we thought was giving them all of the options initially was too overwhelming, especially all of the other reactions. So only once they start typing in the substance, we then populate the other things. So yeah, so Mr. Just show around, what is going on. So again, manifestation. Yeah, I think Ian. Yeah, Ian. So we just moved gears and we've come to the user interface part of the allergy template. So here in this case, right, Mr. Can you just do a full refresh, show how it looks like? So to begin with, the clinician doesn't get overwhelmed with a lot of information. We are just showing him the bare minimum, which is the substance alone. And once they fill in the substance with, say, something, again, here we are just doing text. This should technically be coded text. We show them the other fields dynamically based on that. So you said that, in status, we'll have to, cut down on a few of those. And manifestations, what if they have multiple manifestations? Like that is still allowed in your template, right? You would still allow them to have things like sneezing, breathing difficulty, and
yes, there's multiple manifestations per reaction.
Okay.
So you have multiple I would suggest you don't have I think there's a case for not having multiple reactions. To say most systems don't allow multiple reactions. So if somebody had another, I'd say they were given penicillin again, you just create another allergy record. It's logically not quite correct, but it doesn't matter.
Right. In the end, it's the same archetype.
It's the same archetype. It's the same SNOMED code.
Right.
And it's the same effect on decision support. So you have multiple penicillin allergy. Right.
So let's say that you had one particular node which corresponded to the fact that the list is empty. How would you implement that in the application?
Yeah, so I would probably, in your UI, I would expect somehow to be able to see, I'd have been expecting to see the original list somehow alongside. And the first thing you'd see is allergy list, no known allergies. Now, that's where you have this is essentially a clinical decision. So that could just be machine generated. So, the CDR, you do a query and you say, well, are there any allergies in the allergy composition? Or is there an allergy composition? And if it's either empty or it doesn't exist, then you just put a message up. But I think you'll find that often people want to confirm that. So they may do a review. So they may ask the question, can I check that you don't have any allergies? And they want to document that the question was asked. So that would be
checkbox, no known allergies found.
Exactly, no known allergies. And then that's where it would go in under that global exclusion.
Right.
And it might have a date associated with it. Now, you can argue whether that has any real clinical value at all, because of course you can say, have you any allergies? And you say, no, I don't have any allergies. And then they say, well, why are you here? The doctor says to the patient, why are you here? And they said, well, you gave me penicillin last week and I've come out in a rash. Bang. Right. That information, you cannot do any processing on it because it can be contradicted two minutes later. But it is something that people often want to say. What I was about to say before my guy arrived was there is a subtle variation on that where people want to say, I just don't have any information at all. So a typical example would be where the patient is unconscious and they want to say, I can't say there are no known allergies, I just can't ask the question. So we have a separate archetype called absence of information for that. I don't particularly think that's useful. I would probably just put no known allergies, patient unconscious.
Right.
Personally, I think it's over engineering. It is the sort of thing that you see in messages, in quite often in a messaging environment where people want to be explicit about that.
Right. Got it. So, practically speaking, right? So you said that this list should only be there for a patient once. So technically, the way we design this form is that this form has to be updated, right? Every single time. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, carry on. I'm just shutting the door.
Sure. So this form has to be updated in place every single time, right?
Yeah. So in a real world example, you're going to end up, let's say, patient has 2 allergies. And I'd also say you almost certainly want to separate drugs from other kinds of allergies, or more accurately, prescribables. Clinical materials. So that would include things like latex.
Right.
It's not a drug as such, but if somebody's allergic to latex, it has implications so that's different from allergic to grass and dogs and cats and bee stings. It's the stuff that, we have to be careful as clinical professionals about using, rather than things that people encounter in their normal life. So because these are the things you really want to have decision support on. So I would separate these 2 out. Use the same archetype, but just two sections in the record.
Okay, just while displaying, right? It's still stored under the same template.
It could be stored under the same template. I think that's again a decision. Do we have one allergies list for meds, if you call meds, and one allergy? I think I'd probably do that visually.
Okay.
So there is in the archetype, there is actually a category element that you could use for that, so people can say this is a drug or a non-drug.
Right,
if you're using SNOMED, you should be able to use the SNOMED inferencing to do that.
Okay, the category in the adverse reaction risk says food, medication, other. So
I wouldn't use that in a SNOMED environment. I would be using the SNOMED code that you're using for causative agent.
Right.
So Ian, but one thing is there. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. This is for questions. Please jump in. Yeah.
In SNOMED, there is a code for no history of clinical findings no history of allergy.
Yeah.
Right. And now, supposing in that space where they say that you are giving an allergy name, for example. Instead of an allergy name, now you one of the choices that should be available should be that SNOMED code which says no history of allergy, right?
Yeah.
Would that not solve the problem?
It solves it. I think it solves it badly. But it's not.
Because it comes under situation. It's under a situation category.
You're wrong with the SNOMED code. We are actually doing that in the UK. Right, so I lost this argument. In the UK, we are using the allergy intolerance resource in FHIR. So this is in FHIR. They said, if we're sending allergies messages from one system to another, all this idea of exclusions and lists and stuff, we don't like that. Although there is actually something very similar in FHIR called empty list. So if you look at the list resource, and I actually prefer the FHIR way of doing it. The empty list resource has exactly the same idea. Look, this list is empty, and it's empty because, and you would put the SNOMED code in there, and we would almost certainly use that SNOMED code in our archetype. So where we're saying the list is empty, global exclusion, I would use a SNOMED code to label that. So it's not about not using SNOMED, but it's where you put the SNOMED code.
Okay.
I would argue that
put this no known allergy code there.
Yeah, so this is about, are you allergic to an agent? And you're saying, I'm not allergic to any agents. It just doesn't seem right to me. I mean, it feels wrong. And I think again, it's the difference between the convenience of sending a message as to trying to get this right if it's inside the patient's record. I could guarantee you that none of the companies who are happy to do this exchanging information will have that inside their systems, because it's messy. Because you could have, 3 allergy records, and then somebody adds that code to one of the as a third. So you've got allergic to penicillin, allergic to erythromycin, no history of allergies. Like 3 allergies. It's
It's kind of like somebody updating their LinkedIn profile to put works that currently not working. And,
It's and I just think it was a mistake, especially as the proper FHIR list resource that you can embed these things inside the list actually handles this quite elegantly. But it's a good discussion because other people disagree with me. In fact, we had the discussion twice, and I won the first time and I lost the second time. So you win some, you lose some.
That's fine. Okay, I think allergies, this is good.
Yeah, we hadn't finished allergies. You were just coming to the interesting bit, which is
okay, right.
So the way that we originally I would have modeled this is to say there is one allergies list composition, and anytime you have a new allergy, you add it to that composition. So you got a new entry added in. So this would be a persistent composition. Have you come across this, Siddharth, the idea of a...
Yeah. You mean that there'll only be one composition?
There's only one, and we keep updating it. All right, and that works. So, and if you delete it, then you delete it from that persistent composition. You save a new copy. That's okay. And for allergies, it works reasonably well. We have found sometimes that can be quite cumbersome, and it's difficult for people sometimes to match up the UI. So there are a couple of alternatives, and the one that we accidentally used was to say, look, we could almost manage this as a set of virtual compositions. So every time we create a new allergy, we actually add it to its own composition with the same name. And you actually assemble your allergy list by querying for anything that is an adverse list composition. And you end up with a list, but actually each individual entry is within its own single composition. It does make it easier to manage, remove an entry, change an entry, update an entry, delete an entry, without having to recreate the whole persistent composition.
Right.
Now,
I would argue for that as well. I think it's just much more easier to implement at the application level to just have this form and then add an allergy whenever you want to, and just delete the composition if you think that allergy is not there anymore.
Yeah, I know that Better in the UK have been having similar discussions because they have a major customer who's and also guys in New Zealand. I threw this idea in. I just mentioned it to them as something we'd played with and found worked quite well. I'll try and find out what they decided because it's the same problem, and I'm hoping to persuade them to have a wider discussion in the UK about making this like a standard way of doing things that we as the openEHR community adopt, and then we build services around that. And I think it's almost like taking things up to the next level of really big chunky record components, like how do you do allergies, how do you do meds, prescribing.
So yeah, so I also believe that this query approach is more elegant because, you may actually have multiple compositions. Some of them may have multi-occurrence, but still, through a query you can get all of them. Yeah, as one view. Yeah.
So I would say the final thing that you might have there is, of course, if you do have this idea of a global exclusion, and the other thing we haven't talked about is the idea of people being able to review an allergies list. So this is something that I had when I was a GP. When we were being good GPs, we tried to go and say, I've reviewed this, and I've asked, basically, I have checked, I've reviewed the list, the patient doesn't, there's no changes to be made. So again, it's this idea of kind of curation of the list it's not about the individual items, is the list as a whole correct? So there perhaps is an argument for having almost a mixed economy of a persistent composition that handles the global exclusion and the review dates, and then at entry level of the individual allergies, handle them as these individual compositions.
Right. No, I think, if we think of it in terms of how a doctor would handle it in his clinic, right? Would he rather have one single piece of paper with all the allergies written there, or would he rather have multiple paper lying around all around the hospital with different allergies? And it doesn't exactly match this analogy, because in openEHR, since we are using the same archetypes, we can still get all of these pieces of paper in one place, and we don't lose information.
Yeah, we have. So the way we started in openEHR was to say these are logically, it's a document, right? I want to see the allergy list. I don't want it, I want to see what all of these things are, because I'm about to prescribe. I'm about to prescribe. I want to check that the patient is allergic to one of these things. So we'd started by saying, well, that's a document. But I think actually there are, as Dileep was saying, because he'll, I'm sure, has come across this issue, sometimes creating this is almost like a virtual document. We assemble that on the fly as a query to pull out all the individual allergies and assemble it. All I'm saying is that there is something which sits on top of that, which may actually be a minimal persistent composition that has, carries the global exclusions and the review dates.
Right, makes sense. I think these are two approaches that are both, having its pros and cons, and we can. It's a good discussion to be had, actually.
It's interesting because it's a familiar theme. So it doesn't just apply to allergies; it applies to vaccinations, applies to problems, procedures, etc., etc.
See, the first approach of having a document. The problem is that from an implementation side, you need to actually have documentation to ensure that it's consistently implemented. Suppose you have the same repository, you have multiple applications listening to using the same repository and working with it. The documentation, guidance documentation becomes extremely important. But
yeah, I'd say, and I understand what you say. If you ideally, within the community that are using the same CDR, I would be trying to get a single allergy record, let's call it that whole thing, allergy list. If it's not possible to do that, I would still try to construct the same little allergy, that all of the discussions we've had, try to get them all doing it in exactly the same way. So even if you do end up having to have separate allergies lists because the different clinics can't reconcile, it's a governance issue. It's a question of, are all these different clinics and clinicians prepared to work with a single list? Or do they each want to do their own thing? So it's a people problem.
Right. I think I agree with that as well, because what if the departments want to have different allergy lists for their own specialty?
I would argue they shouldn't. I'm not. We haven't got single allergies lists in the UK. The closest we have to it is that the GP record has an allergy list, the hospital an allergy list. It's where we're trying to go next. Is to say, look, this is crazy. You either have an allergy or you don't. It's not a matter of opinion.
Right.
It's not like problems are different. Lists of problems are different because different professionals need different problem lists shaped different ways to make. But it's the patient has allergies or not. So it should, at least in theory, be possible for us to agree. And if we disagree, if you as a hospital specialist disagree with me, well, let's have that discussion, because it doesn't help the patient if we each have our own lists. One of us is wrong. So let's figure out who's wrong.
Right, definitely. So when it comes to the implementation, right? So what we've done is that we have a multiple repeatable button here. So when they click on that add allergy button, we get the next allergy and we get the next allergy.
Yep,
so
that's fine.
What we've figured out is that if we make this a single composition, if we make this a global composition, we need to be able to edit this form every single time they come back to it.
Yeah.
That I've noticed that it's kind of an implementation nightmare. It's not really difficult, but we are still in the process of figuring it out. How to really do that.
So it is challenging. And so this is coming back to this idea of, rather than when you've got these multiples inside in your allergy list, rather than putting them all inside a single composition, physical composition, when you save each one inside a new composition, but give the composition the same name. So when you query for my allergy list, it brings back all of them. It still feels like a coherent list to the clinician. They don't care where they come from, But if you have to then update one of these or delete it, then you're just deleting the whole composition. You're not having to manage the individual entries within a more complex environment.
Right, definitely. That sounds like a much easier to implement thing, at least from the form perspective. Okay, then should we move on to the more complicated OPD form? I think we will just take a look at some of the fields. What do you say?
Right.
So I think we'll start in the reverse order now. Let's take a look at the UI first, and then we'll come back to the template, because let's see if you can guess exactly what we are using just by looking at the UI.
So I'm just checking my heating engineer doesn't need me. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
All right, yeah. So, we'll start with the UI for this, the OPD visit. And, I'm pretty sure you can make out what archetypes are, we are using. And we'll also walk through the whole thing. So right now, we just have a select, although it could be Snowman. So here, right, okay, we'll just take a look at the form first, and then we'll come back to the template. So that's symptom, and we made this body site into a multiple text. This is something that Atul worked on very recently. So what do you think about, is this really?
Good. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So then, we have each symptom wise more progression. So these things, right? Do you think we need to show it to the clinician? As you said, like the lesser the information you provide on the display, the better.
Yeah. So the less, and look, again, as you know, when we model these things, we do try to capture as much as we can, but we really don't expect people to use all of it, right? So if I was going for a generic, outpatient consultation, I'd probably take almost all of that away. I would just, and then in a sense, it's react to the demand from the clinicians. If they said, hey, look, it's really important for us to know the disease progression, then you say, that's fine. Okay, we can put that back in. So people do say, I've had, the patient's had stomach pain for which has been worsening over 3 weeks, blah blah blah. But is there value in structuring that? Usually not. I think that's, generally speaking, easier just to create some narrative for it. If somebody makes the case and said, no, actually it's really important for our research, or for I guess something like seizures might be a place where people actually want to record things more explicitly, then in those cases, I would make those available in the template and then in the UI.
Okay.
So I think often, particularly with these very complex data collection environments, start with the really simple stuff and react and say, hey, put it in. The guys in Jamaica, Kisha and Candice, learned that the hard way, because they did basically what you've done. And they replicated quite a complex outpatient form that was used in Jamaica. And the clinician said, we want all this, and we want it structured. And they did what they were asked. They had this huge long form with lots and lots of check boxes and drop downs. And the clinicians went, no, too much. So there's a psychology to it.
Okay. Yeah, so Dr. Pramod designed the template for this, and he has been working with OPD based hospitals quite a lot, and he has a lot of experience with primary care, how it's done in India especially. So I want to also get his opinion on is how much information is really needed. Like, let's go to the template and let's see all the nodes, and we'll also examine like what can be removed here then. So what do you say is the reason for encounter archetype needed, or should we just model that under story and history?
Do you want me to answer? Do you want?
You answer. I think.
I think it's useful. We did this in our general practice. So, and I was at a meeting just last weekend with it's a bit like this actually. It's a group of health informaticians who get together over a weekend. We drink a bit more, I have to be honest, but we discuss things like this. And there is a big problem in differentiating a diagnosis from the reason someone's here. So this is about why did you come today? What do you need my help with? I'm here about my diabetes, or I'm here with chest pain. So it may be, and that's different from the diagnosis, or it's not necessarily the same thing. And so what we find in GP systems, because they don't in the UK, because they don't have this idea of reason for encounter, they just have problem. Somebody will come back after they've had a stroke, and the GP needs to say, they're here because it was about their stroke, and it ends up in the record as like they've had 6 strokes, because each time another problem. So it looks like a diagnosis. It's not. It's a label about the encounter. What's this about? And also, I think it's part of that orientation, particularly in secondary care settings. Why is the patient here? Right. It's what's on the whiteboard in the ED. RTA right. or whatever. I think it's a useful bit of orientation as you start the encounter. Okay. To work through.
Right. So coming to the next one is, do we really need that history section, or is that fine without the section?
You don't need the history section, but so semantically you don't need it. Remember, so you can search based on sections, and you can exclude things or take them in. So they are searchable and queryable, but you don't want to do any heavy semantics in there at all. So the answer to your question is you don't have to have it in there. It may be helpful, though, in orientating clinicians and indeed developers, because it's got to line up with a tab heading. As I see, I think you had it in UI. So given that you've said this is quite a complicated little template, I probably would have put history in there.
Okay. Yeah, I think that it does definitely help the developers when they identify what all should be the different tabs.
Yeah.
So yeah, we've used this story, which is a free text, and then why is story 0 to multiple? Can they have multiple stories?
It's because I think we did that because at least in some places they might want to add multiple SNOMED terms.
No, but story is more like the narrative, right? Like
it is, but then some people want to add that in as just a set of SNOMED terms. I mean, I don't entirely disagree with you, and I can't remember the reasons for it. It probably was my idea. It might have been a bad idea, but that was the thinking, so that if people didn't want to write narrative, they just wanted to put in a bunch of codes, they could do it.
Right. Okay, so now
as you don't agree here, and that's fine. I think you're quite right to constrain that back down. That's the whole point of the templating mechanism, is to say no, that's too complex, or we want to enforce narrative here. So
got it.
It's reasonable.
That's fine. So under the structured detail, do we need this, or should we remove the whole thing? What do you think?
I think I would be guided by local practice and an understanding of where and how this is going to be used. My own feeling is that coding or recording symptoms and signs is fairly low value unless you've got a clear reason for wanting to do that. I again use the example of seizures, or again, if you were in a research facility or research academic hospital that was interested in chest cardiac pain, then that might be part of their protocol. But I'm not sure if I was the working doc, I'm not sure I'd be or maybe it could be switched on if they went into some kind of coronary protocol. So I was talking to some cardiologists this morning, and they might say, no, look, that's quite important for us. If the person, it's, do you think this person has a potential?
So it's not mandatory, right?
It's not mandatory. It's not mandatory. No, it could be.
So we're giving both choices, like you said.
Yeah.
Exactly like you said. If it's a GP, maybe story is adequate.
Yeah.
But if it's someone like a cardiologist, they prefer having a sort of a little bit of a checklist. You see, that's the difference.
Yeah, that's it. And this is what what makes this world so difficult, is that we have all these different expectations of granularity. So yeah, absolutely.
Right. And neurologists also, they also prefer having a sort of a checklist like cranial nerves, CNS.
So if they have a checklist for signs and symptoms, right? Should we go back to the UI and just take out all of the text and body side, all of these, and just make these checklists, checkboxes for predefined conditions? Should we even have such a input being displayed to the...
No, so if you come back to the form, now, and in case you just fill story, right? What you do is you just, what it should be is just have story, and the symptom, there should be a plus sign. If they want to give detail of a symptom, they can press that plus sign, and then it will open up this box. That's how I think it will be the best.
So, okay, you want to add some structured symptom in case they want to, okay.
In case they want to, or, for example, in Vellore, we learn how to actually give a symptom and then talk of the history of the presenting part of the symptom. We give more details of each symptom.
Yeah.
Right? But if you go to a government hospital, a GP has no time there. They just put everything under the story.
Right.
You got it, right? If I go to a cardiologist, they prefer that symptom because they will then say, okay, I'll check this system, I check this system, like that. That's how it happens.
Right.
So maybe that's the best way of doing it. You should probably, when you're opening the screen, don't show any of the stuff except the story, and then have a plus in case they want to give something about the symptom.
Okay.
What is it showing right now when you open the screen? It's showing all this body side, everything's coming in place.
Yep. We just show them the presenting problem and we show them the symptom directly.
And all this comes in. So all this should be hidden. Only if they press the symptom, this thing, then it should show up. That's how probably be the best.
Right. Okay. I think Ian, you also agree with that?
I agree with that. Yeah. And again, for exactly the reasons Dr. Jacob said, is it's different people have different needs and different levels of granularity.
Right.
In these areas. So
right. So is it a good practice to put all of these checkboxes as just signs and symptoms? Like they'll have their own template, right? And they want to check.
That'll be too. No, that kind of irritates them.
Yeah.
If you show too many checklists and all that, they get irritated.
Right.
Yeah. So you put the symptom. He presses the symptom button. Then he puts his symptom there, and then if he wants, he can give body site and all that stuff. That's how.
No, by checkbox, I actually mean just a small checkbox there that says predefined symptoms. So if they check that literally means them typing in the name of the symptom, the body site, all of that will just be predefined for them. So let's just say things like, okay, what would you do for things like diabetes or hypertension? Let's just actually know that won't be a sign or symptom.
Chest pain or abdominal pain, the classic acute abdomen is a good one, because it's all about symptoms and signs. So again, I think it's hard to do this in a very generic way, because depending on the presenting problem, you're going to go down very different avenues. So, and that's where, I don't want to divert, but I got interested in how we might be able to almost pre-template some scenarios.
Right.
So if you thought, no, this guy's got an acute abdomen, it's not just he's had some bad food. There's something bad going in here, right? I need to start going into acute abdomen mode, so I start to record things in a much more structured way. And I think this is your difficulty. It's almost impossible to make this both easy to use and generic.
Right. So, okay. So I'll actually show you a particular case record that I have with me. So this is a traumatic case record, a case record for trauma. And here under the primary survey, they have a couple of, questions. Some of it is like focal neurological deficit, posterior midline tenderness, altered consciousness. So these are symptoms, right? These are either signs or symptoms.
Yeah. But this is a form that's about acute trauma. So the context. There's a context here already. Okay. So I would model this as a very specific template and a very specific form.
Right.
It's the difference between here's a generic form. We don't know what's happening. It's your clean sheet.
So instead of choosing a path, Siddharth, what you do is, if you want to make a form now, we'll make a separate archetype for that trauma. Right. Right now, we are trying to give a GP or even any a doctor a basic form for putting down his OPD visit. Right now, the question is, like I said, a GP may just be happy with the story because he'll just put 2-3 lines. But a neurologist would like to have a little more detailing there. So this will cover both. But the thing is that what you should do is you just show the story, and then the symptoms, if they want to put a plus, then you have that plus, and they should press the plus, and then the rest of it open. I think that'll be better.
Yeah, exactly. And in the specialist neurology template or the acute trauma template, you would use the symptom sign archetype under the hood. It wouldn't look like that, but that's the structure that you use, because that means whether the GP had recorded it or the neurologist, they would all end up being symptoms and signs in exactly the same place and hopefully coded accurately.
Right. But again, the symptoms and signs is a cluster. It's not a standalone archetype. So what would you put this under if, for example, we have a form like what I just showed you?
It would be the same. Just put it under story.
Under story.
History is the usual container. So you might not actually have the narrative. Well, you would actually see where it says remarks, if any, under assessment. That would be the story.
Got it. What about comment? Is that
sorry, say again?
Comment. The comment under. There is always a comment under all. Oh, actually, there is no comment here. Okay, interesting. Okay.
I'm sure there'll be a comment under symptom sign.
That's
description.
There is. And the story is a free text box you're giving. No, that's why they will not have put a comment.
Yeah. Okay.
Free text box.
Got it. So here we had quite a bit of confusion because in family history they are modeling it in 2 different ways. So there is the per problem and there is the per family member. So you either start talking about the per problem and then talk all the family members who have it. Or you go the other way around. So
give me a second.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks very much. I'll give it a go through, Rob. Yeah.
So Dileep,
I thought you had taken this out. I thought you had taken the per problem out here.
No, we have taken it out. This is
correct. I think. Yeah, I also believe that it will be the per family member, which is more, more useful.
Yeah, actually, the reason why they have got this, I'll tell you why. There are certain diseases. A very classic disease would be, the bleeding disorder one. I'm currently just blanking out. Which is that one? Yeah, Siddharth. Hemophilia.
Hemophilia.
Right. Hemophilia is something that is very, very much a problem in a family. If you have hemophilia, all the male members will most probably have it.
Right.
Right. So that is why I think they have this per problem business, because it can be a family problem of having hemophilia. Once you put hemophilia there, then you expect most of the males to have it, just as a warning sort of a thing. But otherwise, normally what we do is we're saying per family member. That's what we normally do. Most of the other EHRs, right? Yeah.
See, again, using a query, you can actually create the other view if you want. Okay. So you can record per family member, and then
is there a family? Yeah, is there a problem for the family? Then you can have a query for that.
Yeah, you can actually view it from a problem-centric perspective also, and then give a list of all the family members. That's also possible.
Right. So I think in this case, we have done it as a per family member, and we just put the relationship and the problem under the clinical history. But again, there is also an argument for using the per problem in case it's genetic. I think that's basically what the archetype modelers have also thought of. Is that true, Ian? The per problem and the per family member under family history archetype?
Yeah, it's just something we identified very early on, that there are 2 quite different ways of approaching it. What are the conditions that are in your family? And that would typically be like an insurance report or a general medical, where you say, who's in your family and what conditions do they have. And then the other one would be you have, is there any history of diabetes in your family? So you're starting from the point of view of a risk assessment around the condition. And there's no right answer. It really depends on who's asking the question. I guess probably the family history one is the more generic. I think you probably modeled that correctly.
Right. So again, do you usually use this slot in the clinical history?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you'd normally want to go, okay, so who's in your family? What age are they? What's the relationship? And do they have any significant illness?
Got it. So I think that's fine. I think examination findings are pretty comfortable that this is okay. Pulse, heartbeat, that's fine. We're just recording a few vital signs. And again, we're using the vital signs section here.
Yeah, there's no need to. Again, it's not wrong to do so. You don't need to. You could remove that and just move everything up a level.
Okay, got it. So again, the sections are basically just like optional for everything.
They're just optional, yeah.
Optional, got it.
Very occasionally, they're quite useful for doing some sneaky things, but they're just very optional, yeah.
Okay.
Ian, how do you sort of constrain this to loin codes?
So, do you mean for like systolic and diastolic?
For the vitals. The very clear thing from FHIR is you have to use loin codes for vitals.
Yeah.
And they don't accept SNOMED because they have a very good reasoning for that. What they say is not every country has a SNOMED license.
Yeah.
And vitals is a very important part of the whole, of the whole examination, the clinical part of it. Yeah. So therefore, they said that's why we are going the LOINC way, and the LOINC had a fairly mature coding system for vitals. That's why they went only for vitals. They went
Exactly. We're still having this discussion in the UK, which is very SNOMED orientated. But as you say, internationally, we cannot be sure that SNOMED is available. So, so there's the quick answer is, in order for this to work, we don't need LOINC. In order to do the querying, it's not internally inside openEHR. Each one of these little, so Siddharth, could you? I can't remember.
So basically, if I take the blood pressure.
I'll show you. It's in the web template. It's not visible in the. Oh no! Actually, there is a separate section.
Can you just change the view?
And then go to dependencies.
No. I think what Ian was trying to say is because there is a clear definition of the path.
Let me just take you through the
dependencies. Yeah, choose that blood pressure.
Yeah. So just click on.
Go to terminology.
No. Wait a minute. Just let me run back a little bit and
bindings. Oh, okay.
Yeah, you're right. I'm just trying to take it a step. Click on systolic. Okay. Right. So inside openEHR, they took the view, because this is a point where actually there were no good international terminologies for these kind of things, that it was easier to create little internal codes inside the archetype. So what you can see there is that the systolic code is 800004. So that is normally what we would use in querying, that very last little code. That means systolic. So if you now go to terminology, Siddharth, there you go, say 80004 systolic. That's what gives us also the internationalization. So you want to change the language on the top right corner to Japanese.
Okay, I guess you can't change. Oh, okay.
Sorry. So yeah, there's the one at the top. Yeah.
Okay, that's Russian.
There's Russian for systolic. Okay, so that there are some advantages of that. Now, of course, you're quite correct. We need to be able to talk to the outside world. So that's where there are two ideas. The first one is bindings, right? So if you click on bindings, there you can see somebody has said the systolic, our 80004 systolic is equivalent to this SNOMED code. Now, I'm not sure if the LOINC ones are in there.
LOINC is also there. LOINC should also be there if you select, go to the top and say LOINC.
No, they are not part of the archetype.
It's not there.
We can't.
Okay. You have to do the binding then for that, is it?
Yeah, so somebody has to do the work and add the binding. I know that I've added LOINC codes to some archetypes. I think maybe body temperature.
Yes, body temperature has it.
Yeah.
So it's a good thing you brought that up, because I want to
add the LOINC code. First, you have to add LOINC. Go to
terminology. Yeah, you've got to add LOINC first of all. So go to languages and terminologies.
Languages and terminology.
Oh, got it.
And then add.
You have to add LOINC.
Okay.
No, but then we changing the whole archetype, right?
Yes.
Won't we be messing around with the archetype?
So we wouldn't.
No, but this is, you're saving this in your own computer, right?
Yeah,
You're not
but
going to the
then
main,
you get
you're not uploading it back into the main frame.
exactly. So nothing's
It's
going to
your own
break.
computer.
Nothing's going to
Okay.
break in your system. So you're right. It's your own local archetype. There's no harm. The problem is if somebody then updates the international one, then you've got version control issues.
So one thing, just go to terminology and please select body temperature. Go to terminology, select body temperature.
We are in the blood pressure archetype. I think for body weight, we had a LOINC encoding in the archetype, but not for the other ones. So anyway, see, I'm also kind of skeptical on where we would really use this. Have you ever actually used this in production somewhere, Ian or Dileep?
Yeah. So it is. I know the guys in Norway are using it. They've done quite a bit of work on this, particularly around SNOMED bindings. So it is helpful. I just want to follow through the story about bindings. So the reason that there are no LOINC codes in here is just because nobody's done the work, because it takes quite a long time to do it, and we haven't had. So I would be saying, if you guys are interested in contributing, please do it. The international community would be delighted. And
Actually,
the CKM tool is actually pretty good for letting you do that, and then you could use the international one with the LOINC bindings. But there's a subtlety in here, and that is that adding the bindings does not add the data, automatically go into the patient data. So it's like guidance, right?
UI will have to do that.
Yeah, sorry, Dileep, on you go.
No, I'm saying the UI will have to actually add to the composition, isn't it?
Yeah. So this is like, all we're doing here is saying we think this is the equivalent code. It's like advice. There is a space within the data, in the patient data, that alongside the AT code, we can record what we call mappings, which isn't a great name because it means you can have an AT code, systolic, along with a SNOMED code and a LOINC code and any other code you want in the patient data and queryable. So therefore, you can look for systolic with a LOINC code, or you could look for the LOINC code 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But that's more useful when you're exporting data. So, for instance, if you were trying to populate a fire, a fire message, you wouldn't need to do a lookup. That it would actually already be in the patient's data.
Right. I think.
So Pramod, I think the confusion here is actually, this is the name of the node. The node name is what?
It's the node name, and it sits behind the node name,
That's fine. That's fine. I understood that bit of it. Yeah. And the thing is that actually, that's what, if you choose body temperature as an example, I'd like to point out something. Can you go to body temperature.
Right. Yep.
Is there, temperature is there, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So when you go there and you go to, because that's what I wanted to ask a question.
Open up the archetype. If you go right, no, not that. No. Go right, and there's an open button. It says parent archetype. There you are. It'll open up the actual archetype somewhere. Yeah, there you go.
Terminology. Go to bindings. Terminology, bindings.
LNC.
Yeah. See, this is the thing. See, so Ian, why did they call this LNC 205? This is a LOINC code, all right. But why did they call it LNC 205?
I have no idea. Historically, so this archetype would have been created quite a long time ago, I suspect, and historically it's been really hard to get standard terminology names internationally. In fact, still very hard. They were supposed to be managed, I think, by a US department, but it was all a bit of a mess. Now I think we'd almost certainly use that kind of
you just name it LOINC, right? Like your SNOMED, you can use LOINC, right? That's what, at least, I mean, that's what I found.
Yeah.
Have to do the binding.
I honestly don't know. Yeah, it should say LOINC. I agree. I suspect it's just historically LNC at some point has somebody's decided that LNC.
Because actually, if you go and do the binding now, go to languages and terminology here. And then you see this LNC 205 doesn't show up in, for example, if I say a plus now, just put a plus here and see the choices that come up. See, there is no LNC 205. Exactly. It's LOINC, ICD-10 or SNOMED.
No, there is add custom, no custom and
add custom. That's what somebody has done.
Yeah. And this is because, in all honesty, the naming and the standard naming of these terminologies internationally has been a mess. We haven't had any. So I suspect LNC 205 has been something about a version. It will have been version 2.05 of Loink or something like that.
Okay.
So yeah, it's you're quite right. It's a mess. It's not all our fault, but it is now. I think one of the nice things that the FHIR value set has done is to get those new standard names,
right,
and a clearer way of doing this in a vendor neutral way.
Okay.
Right.
And we should, and you can report that to the CKM guys and say we think that needs to be changed to Loink rather than LNC 205.
Right.
Or somebody will tell you why it's correct, but it doesn't sound correct to me.
No, Ian, in fact, it'll be interesting to actually, look at an archetype design, okay, where this language codes and these bindings are kept as separate files, so that the international archetypes can be just neutral, single language. And then
you want to see what that looks like in the actual archetype.
No, I'm just saying, because if I want to actually do a mapping and keep myself, okay, as a separate file, which I can actually go use in conjunction with a archetype.
Mm.
Okay, I'm just thinking loud.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's been discussions back and forward about whether it makes sense to capture the languages and the mappings and the different bindings inside the archetype or not. I still think it's probably right. You start to end up with a real management headache once you start splitting these things up. But I understand there is an argument for doing it differently.
I agree here too, because most of the times I've seen myself put these SNOMED codes, these mapping codes in some other file anyway, because we need that information to maybe map it out to FHIR or do something, when exporting this. So if it's not part of the archetype or the template, then we need to store it somewhere else.
Yeah.
So
I mean, the other thing is that the bindings are very helpful in simple use cases, and for the vital signs, it's pretty straightforward. But you'll often find that once you're building more complex templates, that the context round about the archetype means that the binding doesn't make sense in the template because you're adding in other, so that it's an interesting space. There is definitely value in attaching some of these Loink and SNOMED bindings to node names, and particularly around some of the vital signs and observations. But it starts to become less and less, it becomes harder and harder to do as the structures get more complicated and nested, and there's other, contextual aspects, and the code doesn't actually give the correct meaning.
right.
Yeah. Now, actually, this kind of node binding node to a terminology is more useful in the FHIR space, because there's one observation
Yes.
resource is used for so many different things.
Yeah.
So it's a need there, but whereas that specific need is not so much there in the openEHR area.
Exactly. We're not so dependent on the terminology for that, but we have to be able to work in that world as well. So it's worth doing. And I know there's a lot of, because I guess most of the countries that are really motoring on this tend to be SNOMED. It's the European countries that have got SNOMED licenses, like Norway and the UK. There has been more of a concentration on putting SNOMED bindings. We've also found it difficult to get good terminology advice. It's very hard work doing these bindings. It's quite hard to do intellectually, because particularly in SNOMED you get 10 different choices. And I know that the guys in Norway got terrible advice from some supposed terminology experts.
Correct. With SNOMED, that is, viewpoints are very different. You can get multiple viewpoints. Same thing.
Right. Yeah, I think even with Loink, that's the same question. You can go wrong in multiple ways there also. So, that is another discussion. I think we'll have it another day. Just to, finish it off. So Ian, again, is an expert at the medication archetype. He's done a lot of work there. So what would you suggest? How do we give medication?
Actually, I think Siddharth, for today, this I would really like to have a more detailed discussion and take some time on it.
Okay.
This ordering, the whole order entry thing,
Right.
if you don't mind, we can keep it for the next time. Is that okay, Ian?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Because I would like to go into a little detailing there, right? Both for labs as well as medication, and give you some case scenarios where we have to think of different aspects.
Definitely, and
Right.
I think the other thing that's probably related to what you're saying is sometimes
Just come up, Siddharth. Just come up to exam again. Sorry. Just a moment. Come to exam again.
Examination. Okay.
Yeah. You're not finished with exam.
Yep.
One sec. So okay, that part of the vitals we have understood now. Now you come to these physical examination findings, and just see if Ian is okay with that. We've again, try to do as little as possible, but see, the thing is, in description, I can just say whatever in one single sentence, right? And just describe there that, okay, chest clear and rest NAD or something to that effect. But in case he wants to go a little more detail, we again for that symptom, you press a plus, no? Again, for that, here also, things for that examination finding, probably you should have a plus. It opens up the rest of that thing.
definitely,
Right?
definitely, yeah, and make that multiple. Make the examination findings a multiple.
Correct.
You want it to be okay. The reason why I constrained this from multiple to one was that because I thought in a OPD situation, they'll probably only do one examination of the whole system and then report all of it under one, examination.
No. See that why there is a review system is generally done. It depends. Again, it varies. No, there is a review system. See, what happens is, I might give more specific details about one system which I've got a problem, but then also I write CVS NAD, RS NAD, abdomen, and say abdomen has a problem. I have to say the rest is NAD. That's what.
Yeah, I should definitely have shared it'd be quite good fun to get the Jamaican guys on this because they're going through exactly the same issues and exactly the same discussions. Examination findings is really hard because they can be very nested and very detailed, like a detailed neurological or ophthalmological examination. But it's overkill for a lot of clinicians. Certainly journalists like GPs are not generally going to want to do that. You need to give them the option, but it would be one big description and then multiple examination findings underneath.
So description, and then you have, in case he wants to give more on the examination findings, you should be able to have a plus sign.
Yeah,
that opens that.
Yeah,
just like in symptoms, right? Just like we did for story and symptoms.
Yeah,
right.
You got it. That's it.
Okay, multiple findings. Then under this, you have this detailed. I think that's where we are probably. That's overkill, right?
Well, these are that's very, very fine-grained yeah. That's almost back office lab stuff. These archetypes were developed by a team in Spain who were interested in DICOM.
Okay.
So actually, I wouldn't use these archetypes because they were designed for something else.
Oh, right.
We're busy building lots of ophthalmology archetypes. If you're interested.
Okay, because of the open eyes.
Because of the open eyes. But this is the difference. If this was open eyes rather than a GP system, we would be getting heavily into all sorts of detailed, eye examination, even for a generalist, eye department, emergency eye department.
Right. Then you
clinical description.
Right here. Yeah.
Okay, this free text. So interpretation, you think, that's what's having there. I thought we keep it as a choice so that, folks can sort of talk a bit, okay, because this finding is there, I'm giving an interpretation that he's got a murmur. So therefore, I assume that he's got difficulty in climbing stairs, for example. But do you think otherwise you can take it off? And
yeah, it's there. again, it's probably largely there to allow people to code things.
Okay.
So, you've got, if this, it's not a blood pressure, but imagine this would be a blood pressure. I know we use a different archetype, but then the interpretation would be something like high blood pressure. So it's not the actual reading, it's the
interpretation of
the interpretation
of
it's,
what
but it's also short of a diagnosis. It isn't, it's not hypertension. Hypertension is the diagnosis. We're just saying this thing is high. So it's also like, in a lab environment, interpretation would be consistent.
So it's worth keeping there, right, Ian?
Yeah, I think it's worth keeping there.
All right. Fine.
Okay. And again, if you're going on some sort of a detailed examination, right, you would rather directly put it under the examination detail itself, right? And you wouldn't like go under the examination findings and then again put it inside this slot.
It's there isn't a right answer to that. So if this was an let's say it was an eye examination, I would probably start with the top one would be eye examination, and the next one down might be corneal examination, and then you go down and down and down and down as far as you need to go. It's phenomenally messy and difficult, and I don't think we've quite got it right yet. But I think the other challenge is how much value is there in outside specialist environments of recording all this in a very structured way.
See, the thing is, it's a value to them. An ophthalmologist will find value having something structured so that they can just quickly tick, 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 tick.
Yeah.
Pediatricians also, another example of pediatricians who like things like that. Right?
And the other place it is helpful, and we're getting into this in the UK, this is this open eyes thing, is that partly because of COVID, there's a big pressure, obviously, for optometrists, for the retail optometrists in the community to do a lot more clinical work and then communicate with the open eyes specialists. So, and that's where they may say, no, look, there's a protocol. We want you to do this in a very specific way because that helps us make some decisions without seeing the patient themselves. So that's probably where we'll get that more protocol-driven, more structure coding in.
Okay. So that, like I said, I think the rest we'll probably take another session because I would like to go into a little detail. The order entry part is kind of important, and I would like to go a little detailing there. And, so that if it's okay, can we have it the next time we probably meet?
Absolutely. And I think there is also a question about whether they should live inside this template at all. Because you can see it's starting to get pretty complicated. And then what if this is an actual prescribing system? What if this is an actual ordering system? It's not just I would like to order a lab test. It's no, you are actually ordering a lab test. That almost feels like a separate part of the record. And the UI would look the same. It's a consistent UI. And this is very much where we got to. We built a GP system in Norway. And I can remember having exactly those conversations. And we did split out, I think, the medication and the ordering, the lab ordering, into essentially separate templates.
And that's how they say, small is good. That's what the openEHR is sort of advocating. Ian, to be frank, the reason I took this, I just took it as an elephant and said that, okay, let's try and see how much of it we can crack. Because with this now, one thing is there, the confidence of being able to do the X-ray form or do the medication form and all that we have that now because we've tried this this elephant but the discussion on that I would like to have more next time with the view that we'll be breaking out those into separate modules. You're
absolutely thinking the right way. And we did exactly the same thing, and other guys in Jamaica have done exactly the same thing. So it's get the requirements there and then start to think, okay, maybe there are ways we can make this easier to manage.
Right.
Both in terms of the size of the template, but actually the workflow, because it's almost when you go into prescribing mode, you do almost go into a little, you're in a little separate section and then you're back again. It's going to be a very specific, probably quite complex UI that you eventually get into, and the same for ordering.
Right.
So when's the next time we meet, by the way?
We'll have to schedule it again. So before that, just for the audience sake, if other people are going to be watching, all of the templates and all of the code is available in this repository. You can take a look at the templates. We'll also be uploading all of the asset files. And what do you think, Ian? Should we keep this going? Should we invite more people from maybe Jamaica also next time?
I think so. I think it's a good idea. Obviously I've been doing this a bit longer than most people, but I say we are all still learning. There are choices to be made here, and it's good to understand different cultural contexts, different professional contexts, because that's the best way we get some standardization, by understanding the pressures that everyone has. So I'm very happy to do this. You can tell I enjoy this stuff anyway. I'm quite sad. I need to get out more and do other things, but I do enjoy it. Find it intellectually very entertaining.
Right, that's true. I think definitely for me too, I find it exciting. I would just like to ask Atul and Nishta, how was this session for you as developers? Do you feel that? How do you feel?
Yeah, it was very nice. Like we learned a lot, and it seems like we need to change some things in our form.
In the UAE, don't worry about that too much.
That's normal. That's normal. I mean, I think it took us something like 2 years to get the GP system in Norway right. This is really hard. People don't appreciate how difficult it is. And I mean, I think the other thing is it's great to have the tech guys in, and I think it's really important that you understand those sorts of conversations. And there will be times where some of the decisions we make have technical consequences. So like saying use less sections if you can, because that has some technical things. The idea that we're going to use AQLs to assemble our allergies list. So it's important that you are involved. But also part of the point of view of openEHR is that people like myself and Dr. Jacob can go away and have these arguments in a corner, and then we present you with it. So you don't have to sit through all of these boring, no, it's not that they're boring, but it's not necessarily the best use of your time. And that's the really good thing, is to be able to say, you can get on and make this stuff work really well. We'll call you when we've got ourselves sorted out, and we'll give you the template. It's a separation of concerns thing. Right. It's never quite as pure as that, and I wouldn't want it to be, because I think it's really good fun talking to technical colleagues, and you have your own expertise and perspectives that are important too. But I've seen too many technical guys sitting in rooms full of clinicians arguing with each other, going, "Come on, guys, just make a decision." I've got other work.
No, but Atul and Nisha, the one thing, Nisha and Atul, the reason why I asked you to come for some of these sessions, or like for example, the demo I gave of the OPD visit, is for you guys to understand the thinking of clinicians. That is important, Absolutely. And because there's a particular way we guys think. Clinician, he has been trained in, and I don't think that is very common, in other sort of fields. Okay, then you get an idea as to why these clinician funny fellows are asking this sort of a way instead of going that way, those sort of things. So that's why a few of these conversations are good for you to.
Oh no, absolutely. This is really valuable, and an understanding that it is really very complex and complicated because of all those granular specialties and subspecialties in different contexts. So what we're doing here is really hard. And one of the nice things about openEHR, at least for me, I've got involved in every single kind of clinical application, from detailed ophthalmology to general practice to registries to cancer systems. And I started as a GP, so all of this stuff is really scary clinically. I'm well outside of my comfort zone. And I should say a lot of the discussions that we get into are actually, although they come out of clinical practice, they're often clinical informatics discussions. And some of the best clinical informaticians that I know are not actually clinicians. They are either technical people or business analysts who have just embraced these kind of conversations. So, it isn't a case of doctors and nurses on one side and technical people. There is a space in the middle for people who want to get into this and understand it as a specialty on its own. So my late wife, who was a really great clinical informatician, really knowledgeable in SNOMED and LOINC and blah, 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 she started as a teacher and then was hired as a practice manager in a GP system, who acquired a GP system. And then the GP system vendor said, you seem pretty smart. Can you come and work? And Hildy had just worked for them for 25 years. So when she joined me in FreshEHR, she left that company. She had huge clinical informatics skills and knowledge and experience, which she just acquired from being in that world.
Yeah, it's really hard to find these clinical modelers. They are a rare breed, and it's either, you know, doctors or nurses at the moment. We can just, you know, train them with the tools. But yeah, people who are not doctors.
When I'm having, we're my little company. Yeah. So my little company, you know, we've been busy enough. You know, Hildy and I ran it between us, and we had interesting. But just in the last few months, we've started to get really, really busy. There's a lot of projects kicking off, and I thought I can get people in and I can explain to them how to do openEHR quite quickly. I can't explain telematics and that whole experience. So I've actually hired, who was Hildy's best friend and was actually the witness at our wedding. She'd retired, and I said to Helen, "Are you really bored being retired?" And she said, "Yeah, I'm a bit." "Right, come and work," because I knew, you know, she'd worked beside Hildy, so I knew she had and bindings, and you know, she'd been through all these discussions we were having about allergies. She'd done that in her working job, and that's the experience that's hard to get. You just have to learn it over time.